I am delighted to be here, Paulo. And in those reels, I saw a younger, skinnier version of myself, which inspired me to get younger and skinnier somehow. So kudos to you all for doing this, year after year. It's been a pleasure. And to be here with all these amazing colleagues and folks presenting and speaking. I'm going to speak to you about something that is very important to me, inequality. And I'm going to be talking about its links to merit. And then maybe at the end, if we have some time, I'll tell you a little bit about the research I'm doing on the backlash to DEI, looking at it from a sort of very critical political science angle, looking at funding and all sorts of things. I am going to start today by kind of walking you through two questions I ask all of my professional graduate students. And these are folks who have maybe 10 to 15 years of work experience. They are in a technology leadership program, and they come from across a variety of industries. So they're in tech or tech adjacent. And the two questions I ask them are, how many of you know what it takes to get fired from your workplace? And almost immediately and confidently, all hands go up. I say, okay, great. Sounds like you all know what it takes to get fired. I say, okay. Next question. I say, how many of you know what it takes to get promoted? Now, this one sees maybe a few hands go up, and even of those, some of them are up halfway. They're not 100% sure. So what I take away from this discrepancy is like, well, what does this discrepancy tell us? Is that we have more information and social knowledge about the behaviors that lead us to getting fired than those that lead us to getting promoted. So promotions come down to a black box of expectations around behaviors, around performance. And this is not simply about performance metrics, right? Whether quantitatively you have achieved certain sales, hit your targets for any of these things you're supposed to sell or do, whether you reach certain milestones or whether you produce the expected deliverables. So things that are a little bit more easier to count and check off on a list. And often what we find is that merit is used to explain and justify decisions. Who was worthy and qualified and hence got that promotion? But there's more to this, right? And this is where I get really excited about the research, because when we say merit, we're also talking about social status and inequality, whether we realize or admit it. And social status is the differences that we have in understanding honor, esteem, and respect. It's those things that people attribute to themselves and to others. So social status is a driver of inequality. It is a form of inequality. And the reason for this, and it is a driver of inequality in addition to the two other drivers of inequality, which is your control or access to resources like money, your power, what power you have, and the third one being your status, your social status. So money, power, and status, the Holy Trinity. Status speaks to our desires of being publicly valued and recognized. And it is not as well researched necessarily as sort of the research into inequality about resources or power. And so the way that status comes alive in our day-to-day conversations, off the cuff is like, oh, you're a professor at Brown, wow. Or wow, you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, you're a CEO of your own startup. My daughter wants to be a lawyer too. So it's these occupations and titles that all have a dimension of social status associated with them and a desire for people to kind of get into those occupations and titles that can then bestow upon them a higher social status. So we may want money and power, but often it's because we believe those things can also get us a higher social status. And these are kind of conversations that pop up through the research side of sociology. So the sociologist Cecilia Ridgway, her work offers some great insights that can help us connect social status, inequality, and merit. And what we find in the research is that status is as significant as money and power when it comes to motivating us to behave in certain ways. And it also impacts how we kind of make sense of situations, make sense of the world in which we see around us. We say, those people have money and power, so they must be better somehow. that we believe them to be esteemed, they are held in high regard, we assume they're competent. So what social status does is it ends up affirming money and power inequalities, but it goes beyond affirming them. What it does is our beliefs about which groups are better generates more material advantages to those groups simply because of membership in them. So what does that mean? It means that in our workplaces, our schools, and anywhere else where we organize ourselves, our status beliefs bias evaluations of competence. So they bias our beliefs about who is suitable to wield authority and who is worthy of leadership. And what do these beliefs end up doing? Well, they justify and allow higher status groups to be pushed towards positions of power and money, while the same beliefs hold back people of lower status group members. And to add another dimension to this, our beliefs about social status inscribe group differences like gender or race or class-based lifestyles into our organizational structures that then decide how resources and money are going to be allocated. And what this does in turn is to create and replicate more inequality in organizations. Research shows us that the status beliefs we have about social differences become salient in the context in which we believe that there should be some differences based on social distinction, and where we believe the social difference is going to be relevant for the organization. So when status beliefs are implicit and considered salient or relevant, then they bias people's expectations for their own and for other people's competence and suitability for authority in a situation. And these implicit biases are stronger the more relevant the social difference is perceived to the goals of the organization or the setting. For an example would be in institutions where we expect gender, race, or class to make a difference, we see that we hold folks in elite universities, that we have an expectation about race and class. Same for engineering classrooms, we have an expectation about gender, right? Essentially what this means is that we have assumptions and status beliefs that we think are relevant for a particular context. And this matters because our biased expectations for competence and authority in turn are important because they can have self-fulfilling effects on people's behaviors and outcomes. They can subtly shape our behavior and create inequalities. For example, you might behave in a way that's more deferential rather than assertive because you have a sense of what happens when you ask for things, like women asking for pay raises. It might impact our actual task performance or attributions of ability. It might impact how people perceive influence and your ability to influence others. And we also know that in situational rewards between otherwise equal men and women, whites, non-whites, middle class, and working class people, social status makes a difference. So if we say this in much more plain language, in the US, our status beliefs assert that people in a particular category, let's say whites, men, or middle or upper class, are not only more respected, but also presumed to be more competent, especially at what counts most in society. And that is in contrast to other categories, such as people of color, women, or working class. The presumption of greater competence implies that higher status people have fairly won their better jobs and higher incomes on the basis of their superior merit. And social status provides an especially powerful form of legitimation in a society that claims to be meritocratic. So status is a central mechanism that contributes to our continued inequalities. What DEI does, both in terms of an idea and a set of practices, is to surface or call out that triad of money, power, and status and their role in organizations. DEI offers a path forward in light of these dynamics, but doing so incurs, as research that I'm doing right now has uncovered, a significant backlash. And the backlash has foundations in some of the challenges that the practitioner world was facing prior to what's taking shape today, as well as the fact that the current administration has singled out DEI as the reason things they believe were not working out well. So we are reminded by this administration, and with a lot of funding around disinformation and misinformation, that merit should rule the day, or the new acronym MEI, Merit, Excellence, and Intelligence. So how does this play out in the real world? I can give you many examples of executive orders. There's 3 that are quite relevant. The first one came out January 20th of this year. It's called Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Program and Preferencing, and understanding that chief DEI officers and equity action plans were somehow illegal, and action were to be taken to dismantle them. Another one was January 27th of this year. It's called Restoring America's Fighting Force, and this one focused on DEI within the U.S. Armed Forces. And its administrative goals were to promote meritocracy and eliminate race-based and sex-based discrimination. And then another one, and they can keep going, is April 23rd, Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy, basically going after Title VI regulations, the disparate impact liability, and sort of focusing on those areas where DEI, quote unquote, was taking shape. Higher ed has not been, spared. So the executive orders in many ways sort of use the language of meritocracy to instill a certain set of values and to, I would say, affirm money, power, and social status to those who feel that through DEI, through inclusion, they are being challenged or taken away. Another great example in the current administration is, despite this language meritocracy, when you contrast what they're doing and they're looking at, if we look at the top roles in the current administration, what they have in common through this lens of status, we see that many worked in the Trump administration the first time, many are from Florida, many gave money to Trump's campaign, many were employed through his campaign. They were, interestingly, formal critics of Trump who have now changed sides. They have personal wealth over $1 billion. They were contributors to Project 2025, or they've had personal relationships with Trump over the years. So they're longtime friend, business colleague, and so forth. So in other words, when we use merit to explain and justify decisions, we don't necessarily acknowledge the role of social status inequality that's fundamental to shaping our ideas around who is competent, who is worthy, and who is deserving in the workplace. So my hope is that we can question whether or not organizational leaders are willing to interrogate how merit is decided within our workplaces, and whether we are willing to expand who contributes to decision about what merit looks like. I think I have 2 minutes to spare, so hopefully we get more time for questions. And I hope I am happy to answer questions on some of the more recent research on the backlash to DEI, which has been exciting and disheartening. But thank you so much for the opportunity to share that.
Wow, Banu, thank you so very much. I don't even know where to start with you. I'm way too excited, so I'm going to stay focused. It's great to meet you. I've heard so much about you. I appreciate everything that you just said. So I'm going to jump in, and we will get to the backlash to DEI. I will promise that. Anyone that has questions, please make sure you are putting them in the Q&A. In the meantime, Banu, when we speak about merit, and I love that you said status, because the definition of what merit was a year ago or 2 years ago is not what it is today. And if we are looking at status as merit, I'm going to air quote it, right? Then who determines your status is worthy to have the merit? And I
That
think, please.
No, that is the question. That is the question. It is a black box. And if you look at some of the research, it wasn't always called DEI. If you look at some of the research in the late 90s or late
Mhm.
80s, early 90s, it's called cultural differences as different folks start coming into the workplace out of the diversity of the demographic will change, but also out of need. Paychecks are not going as far as they need to. So what we see is organizations trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? What do we do with these different folks that are coming in? But by that time, our pay systems around, what's good performance, what professionalism looks like, and who inhabits those bodies that kind of match the parameters of how we think about
Right.
pay, how we think about professionalism, how we think about good performance. They are so sedimented, you would actually have to work on like systems change to kind of go back and be like, okay, what are the parameters around which we decide whose work and whose bodies fit this mold of
Right.
you're doing good work? This is what
And
it
it's
looks like.
and I think it's even more than that, right? Because systems were set, but who makes the systems?
Yes, exactly.
People. And so,
Exactly.
I always say when I'm working with companies and they're like, but we have diversity, Leslie. I'm like, the different color khaki pants and
Yeah,
blue shirt is not exactly
it's
the
not.
diversity we're speaking about. And then with merit, what was happening with so many women, women of color, those with disabilities, sight seen and unseen, the goalpost kept being changed on what the merit qualifications
Yeah,
were for you to be considered
absolutely.
to have the status to become a leader or to become a manager. And so that goalpost kept changing. In any of your research, did you see any of that? Because it's very quiet, not quiet within corporate.
It is quiet. It is quiet. So those are hard to kind of get people to tell you that that's happening, but absolutely, I can tell you. And I can give you an example from colonial times. So in
Mhm.
colonial India, when the British administration decided to be a little bit more open and allow sort of Indian nationals to kind of have administrative positions, they had an English test. And the Indian nationals started excelling at this English test. So then the British are like, oh no, what do? We need a horse riding test too. so,
Right.
so historically, as you're trying to make sure that you keep your social status, you keep putting up more barriers, but you call them merit-based, performance-based. So absolutely, in more contemporary times, you can see this in sort of very ambiguous language used in performance review. So it's not outright,
Yes.
it's ambiguous to give folks the flexibility to say, you didn't quite do this, you didn't quite meet this goal post.
Right.
But the goal post looks different for you than it does for me, than it does for a man. But it's the same
And
language.
that's where, exactly. So that's where it become, but it's honestly sometimes not the same language. Because when I sit with companies in review and I can review, and I don't know anyone, right? I'm
Yeah.
just looking at how they're reviewing and helping them progress. I will see the words that are aggressive or not polished. I don't see that when it's written with someone that's not of color. So
Yeah,
when we look at these merits and we look at these review, languages definitely have a
it does.
play on what this merit and status is.
Yeah. So let me clarify. The language of the performance review is the same
Mhm.
language, right? This is what we're going to go through, but how we sort of put
Right.
our answers in looks very different. So I'm going to interpret high performance differently for you than I am for a white male potentially. And then I'm going to use very
Absolutely.
different words to describe their performance, right? So on the surface, it looks like you're being reviewed through the same,
Lens.
same lens, same metrics, but you are not. And it's those nuances around sort of what sociologists call sort of money, power, status that get
Mhm.
infused into our interpretations of, well, how do I decide if Leslie is really doing the things that I think, and so the research definitely shows that there are different expectations and belief systems that come in, even if
Mhm.
we are being told that the metric for assessment is the same.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to the question that was put in. What systems can be put in place to counteract presumed competence?
That's a great question. So part of the issue right now, there is a great book out called Make Work Fair by Iris Bonnet and Siri Chilari out of Harvard. It is a
Mhm.
systems thinking book. The problem is right now, some of the things that are in it under this administration would be really questionable. So you could be open to legal risk, right? So one, there's sort of like understand the legal and social context in which you're operating, but two, I think it's sort of interrogating who has decided what kinds of systems are in place, and are they resulting in those intended outcomes that are good for beneficiaries, good for employees, good for customers, right? So I think there needs to be some sort of audit before you change a system of like, what is the system accomplishing? I also teach entrepreneurship. So the first question I would ask is, what problem are we trying to solve? So are the systems leading to outcomes that we do not like, right? Or are they
Mhm.
contributing to outcomes that we don't like? So I think one, understanding what problem we'd be solving by looking in a deep dive fashion into these systems, and then sort of rethinking what elements of the system need to be changed, and the components of the system. So really just kind of coming down to what
Right.
are the components.
And with the components, I'm always going to go back because it was what was said in that other panel. Who is sitting at the table when we're speaking about rehauling the systems? Who do you have that needs to actually benefit from the systems? And it's not only who are we speaking to, why are we doing this? And then what's the outlook we're looking for beyond the checkbox of we have all these amazing people. So I think that in itself has to be examined before we even get to the system. Whose status or merit gets to plan these systems, you
Yeah.
know?
And again, I kind of go back to like, if you're in a startup, the sort of unwritten advice is by employee 7, you've set the culture.
Yeah.
And culture is a really interesting phenomena because you can change it through multiple ways, but you have to identify sort of what about it is causing certain things that you don't want to see anymore.
Right.
So company culture, kind of going back to Allie, who is actually one of my students.
I was
Allie,
her question.
um, right, is sort of thinking about like, what are those elements of culture that you can kind of try to change, and what of those elements are related to myths that people have about, for example, what it takes to get promoted, what it takes to succeed in a company. Um, you know, company culture can be used as a form of status keeping, right?
Yes.
When company culture dictates that you need to do something a particular way in order to succeed, that's actually another way in which you are conformed into and assimilated into the company, and where those conversations around merit are much more aligned with like conformity and alignment rather than are you being innovative, which I've always found to be really odd. Like, you want innovation, you want different points of view, you want
Mhm.
distinction, but your performance reviews, your culture are all around fit and conformity.
Well, yeah, you want it the way that you want it, but not, and that's always why I work for myself, I guess. Why I'm really good at working with companies, but not in a company, for the simple fact that you hire someone, you say, I want that creativity. I need that innovation. I need you to come in and shake it up. Only could you shake it up this way within this box and only go
Yeah.
down this aisle and only speak to those 5 people when you do it. And so it comes back to, if we're going to evaluate merit, what's it look like across the board? And I always like to say, from the mailroom to the boardroom, that sets your culture and your company culture. And it's something that evolves. It shouldn't be stagnant. And I think that's where people get stuck of how do you build on that?
Yeah.
I know we have a short period of time, and I see Susan has a question, and I want us to speak about the backlash because we would
Mhm.
be remiss not to do that. It says it's fascinating that employees list curiosity as a valued skill set in a job description or listening listing. And yet, when employees begin to administrate their curiosity and explore these questions you raised in an effort to improve workplaces, they were shut down. So it's kind of what we just discussed. Like,
Absolutely. It
be,
is.
be
It
diverse, but don't be diverse.
It is. And this isn't just about inclusion per se, it's also about innovation. So I do a lot of innovation research, and what we see is folks who have truly innovative ideas, who are truly sort of running counter to some of the norms and expectations of the organization, and who have the potential to kind of create real new business models or opportunities. They can't do it in the headquarters. They have to go to subsidiaries and experiment there.
Right.
Right. And we
Right.
see this all the time because the structures of the headquarters or the structures of the established organization are such that changing them would probably take some radical behavior, some radical
Mm.
external or internal force. Or you're just gonna, carve out a little path for yourself and navigate that. It's organizations are fascinating places where people intersect
Absolutely.
across different, ways.
Right. And I always say there's a difference of having department culture and company culture, and department merit and company merit. And so that's something that needs to always be examined as well. Are we looking at it as a whole, as a company or organization? Or are we looking at this department because this department survives well and does well because they have a great manager or whatever that is? And so something that when we think about merit as a company, let's not always look at it as a whole, but let's also break that down. Now let's speak in a few minutes about the backlash of DI. I would love your thoughts. I know I have mine.
So glad. So we have been talking to folks who are in DEI adjacent fields, practitioners, consultants, leaders, scholars, policymakers. We're up to like 80 folks right now. And sort of there's sort of the issues that were endemic to the field, the challenges of the field in itself as it was kind of grappling with no agreed upon definition of DEI, no agreed upon practices, no agreed upon metric or impact, and no professional body that advocates for on behalf. So you kind of piggyback on HR or some other funky thing.
Right.
Um, and those challenges are related to potentially some legal questionable, activities, ethically
Mhm.
questionable activities, and strategically questionable activities. So three buckets of things that were being dealt with in the field, and then technology of like, well, now there's AI, you can just scroll out your own, DEI program, and why do you need humans? But that in itself is not the reason. It is a tiny little hook that anti-DEI people use. The way we're sort of talking about it, and we're pretty critical, I would say political science and feminist scholars who are looking at it from this big lens of like the foundations of this country and racialized and gendered capitalism continue today. And as
Mhm.
you're sort of trying to upset the money, power, social status of people, DEI gives you language, opportunity, and a path forward. And so it's incredibly threatening in terms of a concept. It's incredibly threatening as a set of practices, and it's incredibly disquieting because it kind of tells people that they belong in America, and it's going to look different than what they want it to look like. And so we're
Right.
seeing sort of three groups come together for the backlash. Tech bros and billionaires who control majority of social media and are
Right.
funneling money for their trans humanist vision of network societies. We have the America First people who are not always right wing, but more sort of where should we spend our money? There is
Mhm.
significant overlap. And then you have the right wing folks who are truly embedded in a white supremacy ideology. So you have three large groups funding, making policy, and delivering sort of this blow to a field that has always trying to figure out like how do they do it, where do they do it, what are some of the
Right.
things they can show for their work. And so, then the question is like, how do you move forward? Right? How do
But
you move?
let's go back. And I'm sorry to interrupt. DEI was not new.
It was never
It's
new. It
it's
was
been called
never
many things.
new.
Right. So when we look at it and say, oh, the last 4 or 5 years, look at this. No, the last 4 or 5 years, partly of COVID, people picked their heads up and looked up and realized what was going on. And it was never built in the last 4 or 5 years on a foundation. It was built of if you are, and let's just call it what it is, if you're a black or brown person, guess what? You're now charged of DEI. And that was
Yeah.
from personal experience. There was no thought process. Is this person qualified? Can they speak about
Yeah.
race, gender, LGBTQ plus disability sites seen and unseen. Do they have support? Do they have staff? Is it a budget? What's our investment? And so it was already built on quicksand. And so unfortunately, it was easy to come in and knock it off. But yet it will not go anywhere because you can't put a genie back in the bottle because we're dealing with human beings.
You can't. And the demographic shift is happening, and people are not opposed to what those things are. And there's a lot of disinformation that tells them those things are taking things from you. And
Yes.
so partially it's this disinformation that's inhabiting the attention of people on social media and other
Mhm.
places that are kind of limiting how people think about it and then being repelled by it, even though it's actually
Yeah.
good for them too.
So Ben, unfortunately, I have to wrap this up. I could be here all day and I'm going to get in trouble. I saw Paula's face pop up and John is there. I want to say thank you very much. What an amazing, I can't wait to read about your study. This was a great conversation. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And
Thank
we look
you,
forward to seeing
Leslie,
you.
for engaging and for your amazing questions, and thank you for your work. It's been an honor to be here today, and thank you.